Join us each week for Iowa Realty's Home Buyer's Guide, an informative hour featuring Iowa Realty open houses, new construction projects, and financial information for today's home buyer. If you would like more information concerning this morning's show or how your home may be included on Home Buyer's Guide, contact the Iowa Realty office nearest you. Home Buyer's Guide is brought to you by Iowa Realty, Iowa's largest.
Making the grade on today's TV8.
High hopes and brave hearts in massive numbers, the American people have voted to make a new beginning.
Face the Nation with Chief Washington correspondent Bob Schieffer. And now from CBS News in Washington, Bob Schieffer.
And good day again. And today, to get new perspective on the new Washington, we'll be talking to three of the key players. In a moment, we'll talk with majority and minority leaders of the Senate, George Mitchell and Bob Dole. First, we go to Los Angeles and talk to the newly named director of the transition team for President-elect Clinton, Warren Christopher. Mr. Christopher, welcome to Face the Nation.
Good morning, Bob.
Let's start by finding out how you intend to go about your task. You're about to undertake one of the most awesome tasks, I suppose, that ever confronts a person, and that is to fill positions for an entire government. With Vernon Jordan, you'll be in charge of that. How do you do it? Is there a timetable? When can we expect the first appointments?
Well, Bob, it is a massive task. We'll begin by looking at various structural realignments. Governor Clinton committed himself during the campaign to make some structural readjustments. For example, the establishment of an Economic Security Council, to slim down the White House, which has gotten, in our judgment, somewhat over-bloated. But after those decisions are reached by Governor Clinton, we'll then turn to the process of the selection of the 25 to 30 top jobs in government. And the transition team, which is directed by me, will be just serving Governor Clinton and Senator Gore and trying to give them the broadest range of options to do this. If I could, Bob, I'd like to lower expectations about the timing. I heard on CBS this morning that there might be some major appointments next week. That would certainly be a surprise to me, and I think it would be to Governor Clinton. This is a serious process. He asked me to conduct it in much the same way as we had the vice presidential search, and so it'll take some time to do the kind of careful investigation that we intend to do.
So you don't expect any appointments within the next week. Will your first appointments be in the economic area, Mr. Christopher?
Well, there will be some appointments next week of other members of the transition team, and there may be some other appointments that Governor Clinton wants to make, but I would expect the principal appointments to come sometime in December. As far as the order in which they'll come, that'll be up to Governor Clinton, but I think it's probably safe to say that with the emphasis he's given to the economic sector, the economic cluster will take a high priority.
Have you decided, has President-elect Clinton worked out yet how this new economic council is going to work? I hear comparisons to the National Security Council for economic problems. But would the Secretary of the Treasury, for example, be the ranking member of that? Would it advise the Secretary of the Treasury? I guess what I'm getting at, will the new administration have an economic czar?
Well, there'll be a considerably higher priority to economic matters in the White House than there has been in the past. No final decisions have been taken on that, but one thing you can be sure of, Bob, and that is that within the White House, economic decision-making will be given a higher priority, tantamount to that now given to the National Security Council and the National Security Advisor. And I think that's the model that will be followed with a team being put together that we're sure can work together. That's a key factor in Governor Clinton's mind, assembling a team that's harmonious and can work together.
All right, now, on Meet the Press earlier this morning, Vernon Jordan, who's also a part of the transition team, said that he expects some sort of a business summit with business leaders and perhaps others. Can you tell us a little more about that, Mr. Christopher, and what do you have in mind on that?
Well, it's very much in the planning stage, but I think Governor Clinton hopes to assemble a group of the top business and economic leaders of the country to advise him as he moves through this transitional process, and I expect that to come in the next few weeks as he undergoes this process. But it will be an attempt to make an audit of where we stand now, to get advice from these individuals who run big companies or who are well known in the economics field as he moves through this process.
Would you expect congressional leaders to be included in that?
Well, either in that or in other consultation, Governor Clinton will be coming to Washington and meeting at that time with the top-ranking people in Congress. So either they'll be included in that session or they'll be a separate session in Washington, D.C.
If I understand what you're saying is that the governor intends to take his own good time and make sure he's got exactly who he wants in these positions. He's not going to be pushed on some kind of timetable. I think you said earlier that you expect maybe the first cabinet appointments not until sometime in December. Would you expect to have the cabinet filled out by the time Governor Clinton is sworn in? And would you ask the congressional leaders, for example, to do what they can to speed up the confirmation process so the entire cabinet could be in place and ready to go to work the day that Governor Clinton is sworn in?
Well, Bob, I want to understate my own role in this. Those decisions will be up to Governor Clinton, but I would expect the major cabinet appointments to be made in December, and I'd expect all the cabinet officials to be in place by the time he's sworn in on the 20th of January. There's lots to do in our country, and he wants to have them ready at that time, I'm sure. On the other hand, I'm sure that he wants to make careful, wise choices. He has about 75 days between now and the time he's sworn in, and we hope to use them very well.
Well, you know, I can recall other transitions. I remember the Reagan transition. I remember the transition of the Carter administration. You were a part of that administration. There were always fights between the people in Plains, Georgia, and the transition team in Washington, between the people in California and the transition team in Washington. How will you make this effort different, and how can you make it more effective?
Well, I don't expect there to be any fights.
But there's already been one, hasn't there? I mean...
Well, if there were some incidents last week, one of the things I'd say about that is Governor Clinton resolved it very quickly. It was not allowed to fester. He talked to me on Thursday noon when he was having some chicken soup and asked me if I would undertake this role, so the incident did not last very long. I would also say that Governor Clinton has done something somewhat unusual here in going outside of his campaign team to choose the leaders of his transition. Political scientists have been recommending that for some time, and we'll see if that's a sound way to approach it. I think it is.
All right. Warren Christopher, we want to wish you the best of luck because you have an awesome task ahead of you. In a moment, we'll talk to the Minority Leader of the Senate, Republican Bob Dole.
This portion of Face the Nation is sponsored by the Archer Daniels Midland Company. ADM, supermarket to the world.
Look what ADM research has cooked up. An all-vegetable patty that contains dietary fiber, is low in fat, and free of cholesterol. One that's made to meet the demands of vegetarians and other health-conscious consumers. It's the Midland Harvest brand Harvest Burger. And so far, it's made a big impression everywhere it's landed. ADM, supermarket to the world.
We Americans have some very particular ideas of what we want in our cars and trucks.
I feel like the car's like wrapped around.
One company gets input from customers at every stage of new product development to find out exactly what they're looking for. That may be why 5 of the top 10 selling vehicles in America are built by the same company, Ford Motor Company.
With your help, our quality gets better all the time.
Ford Motor Company. Quality is job one. It's working. It's working.
And now we turn to a man who will certainly be one of the key players in Washington next year. I suppose the ranking Republican next year in Washington, the Republican leader in the Senate, Bob Dole. Senator Dole, you have already said that the good news for Bill Clinton is he'll have a honeymoon early on, and the bad news for him is that you'll be the chaperone. What does that mean?
Well, I think it means that myself and Bob Michael, the Republican leader in the House, is certainly going to be helpful where we can, but we do have a responsibility to our party. And I think also some of the other voters, the parole voters who did not vote for Clinton, to sort of be the watchdog and keep an eye on things. So it's not going to be destructive, but it's going to be, I think, hopefully a very positive role we play.
Well, I want to ask you about this. You have sort of said that you hope to be a spokesman or a voice for the parole people. Why shouldn't Mr. Clinton say that he's the voice for the parole people? These are the people who voted against your man, George Bush. Why suddenly are you their voice?
They voted against both men, so it seems to me we've got to go out and try to attract the parole people. And I think some of the areas where I think we have areas of agreement, particularly on the deficit. Now, if President-elect Clinton comes in with a lot of budget cutting and restraint on spending and no new taxes, then we may be able to help him.
What do you think the first part of this administration is going to be like? You heard Warren Christopher say he hopes to have the cabinet in place by the time that Governor Clinton is sworn in. Do you think that's possible? Will you cooperate on along that line?
First, I want to say I think he's got a great transition team in Vernon Jordan and Warren Christopher. They're well respected by both parties. I would hope we could cooperate with Senator Mitchell on the Senate side to get all the nominees confirmed. We don't know who they are. Obviously want to have some time to investigate, but there's not going to be any effort on the part of Republicans in the Senate to stop or block any nomination.
What about one of the things that's coming out of the Clinton camp, and that is that Governor Clinton intends to use his executive powers to lift a lot of the restrictions that the current administration has placed on things having to do with abortion, the gag rule, for example. There's any number of things that he has talked about perhaps doing early on. You think that's a good thing?
Well, I think he has to make a judgment. Obviously, he wants to do it. He has, it doesn't cost anything. He can please a lot of people without spending a dime just by issuing executive orders. Some I might agree with, and some I might disagree with, but that's going to be a judgment he'll have to make. He needs to satisfy some of the more liberal elements of the Democratic Party, and he can do it in this way without any cost.
Do you, you were quoted, or you were not quoted, but someone described you this week as feeling in some ways sort of liberated, that you'd been carrying the president's water for the last 4 years. I think you yourself said that sometimes it wasn't easy to carry the water.
Well, there won't be any vetoes, so I won't be on twisting arms for vetoes, but now we have to keep enough votes so they can't get cloture if it's a matter of deep policy difference between Republicans and Democrats. But it'd be a different challenge in my view, and I guess you do feel a little bit unfettered or liberated. One thing we ought to do, though, is to make certain we have a special prosecutor look into Lawrence Walsh's activity the Friday before the election, the so-called special prosecutor, because the attorney handling that case contributed $500 to Bill Clinton. His law firm contributed $20,000 to Clinton. And it seems to me it was outrageous that they would have this indictment of Weinberger with a note sort of bringing George Bush into the loop the Friday before the election. I think there ought to be an investigation.
Yeah, let's go over this, because I have not heard you say this before. You're saying you want a special prosecutor now to investigate the special prosecutor who brought these indictments.
I'd rather have the Justice Department. I don't really care for special prosecutors unless we include Congress in the law. But it seems to me that, I don't know whether they won or lost the election, but the timing, something wrong there when the press release from the Clinton-Gore headquarters said the 29th of October, and the indictment didn't come until the 30th. There must have been some communication between the Clinton-Gore people and the special prosecutor's office.
Well, now that's a rather serious charge you're making.
I think it ought to be investigated. I would also hope that President Bush would consider pardons for some of these people, including Cap Weinberger.
Well, that was my second question, because as you well know, that's the talk going around the White House, that many senior people in the White House are urging the president to pardon Caspar Weinberger. You're saying he ought to do it, flat out?
You just have to take a look. Walsh has been 6 years investigating Republicans, 6 years, spent at least $40 million directly, probably another $40 million. It's a Democratic hotbed of Democratic activist lawyers in that special prosecutor's office. He may be a nominal Republican 30, 40 years ago. But yes, I think President Bush ought to consider that. Now, he has to make the decision. But one thing we ought to do, we ought to investigate to determine whether or not politics played any part in the second Weinberger indictment.
What about pardons for the other people that have received...
my view, if you're going to do one, you do them all.
Just do them all?
Do them all. Because they haven't gotten any convictions anyway. They've had a couple of plea bargains where they've had misdemeanors. It's been a very expensive process. He's had 6 years, as long as a Senate term, and he didn't pay his D.C. taxes. A lot of things they didn't do right. But this last, that's a straw that broke the camel's back. When the Friday before the election, when President Bush was closing the gap to have Lawrence Walsh and this fellow who contributed to Clinton's campaign $500, Brosnahan, I think his name was, and his law firm $20,000. My view is that ought to be investigated.
Wouldn't that in some ways leave the president in the position of looking as if he tried to help someone and that he was taking retribution on someone?
No, I didn't say fire Walsh. I just say, you know, investigate it and pardon those. Now, that's going to be up to the president. I can't make that judgment. But my view is it's been nothing but a political organization and an effort for the past couple of years.
What will be your priorities in the coming year, Senator Dole? What legislation do you think is it most important to pass? What legislation do you think it's most important to block?
Well, I think health care is one we need to pass, and my view is we're going to need a consensus, a bipartisan effort, because no one group has enough votes. Hopefully, deficit reduction. I feel strongly about the deficit. I want to help a president like Clinton where I can on the deficit. Maybe a line item veto would be a good way to start off. That would be a way to catch the attention of Senator Robert Byrd and others who feel strongly opposed to that.
Well, that's Bill Clinton says he may like the line item veto.
Well, let's see how well he likes it. And maybe an amendment to say you can't contact government for 5 years if you serve in the Clinton administration. Something else he says he likes, I think it's a mistake myself. Maybe it'll be 2 years, maybe more than 1 year. But maybe the line item veto will be a place to start out to see if he really believes that we ought to push ahead, give his presidency some authority to knock out some of the things we put in bills.
Forgive me, but have you always favored the line item veto?
Yes.
You have always been for
I remember
that.
Senator Byrd looking across to us here about 2 months ago said, "You will rue the day, you Republicans, if Bill Clinton becomes President of the United States, that you ever advocated a line item veto." Well, I still think it's a good idea for a Republican or a Democratic president.
Republican leader Bob Dole, thank you very much for being with us this morning. In a minute, we'll see the Democratic view from the Democratic leader in the Senate, George Mitchell. In a minute.
The fox and the grapes. There are rewards to be had, yet they are not always within easy reach of investors. With Merrill Lynch mutual funds, the potential need not elude you. We search high and low for opportunities, but let us remind you, sometimes to reap rewards, you have to wait till they're fully ripe. The moral is, patience is a sound investment principle as well as a virtue.
Something is terribly wrong with these pictures, but you could look all day and not see it. The problem is carbon monoxide, an invisible, deadly pollutant emitted in auto exhaust. Fortunately, there's a way to help reduce these emissions. Ethanol, a renewable fuel derived from corn grown by the American farmer. And beginning November 1st, the Clean Air Act will require motor vehicles to use oxygenated fuels such as ethanol in 39 of the nation's most polluted cities during the 5 winter months. In 1988, when the program was introduced in the Denver area, atmospheric levels of carbon monoxide dropped 8% in the first 2 months. And this coming winter in Denver, the use of ethanol-blended fuels is expected to exceed 50% market share. So while the problem may be invisible, the solution is becoming clearer every day.
This symbol outside means you have the standard inside that an entire library of software has been written to. The Intel microprocessor. Think of it as a library card that lets you run the software of today and tomorrow. So check out computers with Intel, the computer inside.
Vive la France. They say, go ahead, eat fabulous food like this and still lose weight. What's their secret? It's the French diet. Tomorrow on CBS This Morning.
And we're joined now by the Democratic leader in the Senate, George Mitchell. Senator Mitchell, thank you for coming. We'd best talk first about this business of Cap Weinberger. Senator Dole has just leveled a very serious charge, suggested that perhaps the Clinton campaign had something to do or some connection with the indictment of Caspar Weinberger and that story. What's your reaction to that?
There's no evidence to support that, to my knowledge. I think it would be a serious mistake for President Bush to make the kind of blanket pardons that have been suggested. Iran-Contra was an abuse of power to pardon all of those involved now would itself be an abuse of power, compounding the original problem. And given the fact that President Bush's statements on his own participation have changed and been contradictory over the past several years, I fear for his sake that it would look like the pardons were intended to prevent any further exploration of his participation. So I think the process ought to work its way. This charge of a political slant in there, Judge Walsh is a lifelong Republican. He served as a Republican appointee in 3 Republican administrations. He was a Justice Department official in a Republican administration appointed to the federal bench by a Republican president. So he's not a Democrat, never has been. There isn't any political involvement in this, and I think it would be a serious mistake.
Well, do you think at the least there ought to be, as Senator Dole said, some sort of a Justice Department investigation of this? Because the timing is rather odd that on the weekend before the election, suddenly this new indictment comes out, and it says that, well, it suggests that President Bush knew all about Iran-Contra. I mean, that was the bottom line.
But in fact, according to the Special Prosecutor's Office, this was known well in advance. The initial indictment was dismissed, and in order to meet the trial date of early January, the new indictment was to be submitted prior to the end of October. So you couldn't do it prior to the end of October without having it come before the election. It was in accordance with the court schedule, having nothing to do with the election.
Okay, let's talk about a little bit about what it's going to be like in the next couple of months and what it's going to be like next year. I must ask you first about this whole idea of a line item veto. I know that's not one of your favorite topics. Right. Bill Clinton is now suggesting it might be a good idea. Right. Senator Dole said, boy, I'd sure like to help him on that. What's going to happen if the president calls you and said, George, I'm sorry, I like this. Will you be with him on that? Or what?
Not on that one, but I don't think that's going to be a major issue. I think there is broad agreement between President-elect Senator Gore and the majority in Congress, and by majority I mean both Republicans and Democrats, on the need to move forward with a change in economic policies to get the economy moving again. Governor Clinton rightly, I think, stressed throughout his campaign that the need is to change the economic policies of the country and to have health care reform. And I think there's going to be broad bipartisan support for that, and we look for a good bipartisan spirit. We're going to appeal to our Republican colleagues. After all of the same people who elected Governor Clinton elected all of the members of the House of Representatives and a third of the Senate, and I think the same mandate for change applies there to the members of Congress as it does to the president.
I want to ask you a little more about that, but let me just go back to the beginning. Would you fight him on the line item veto?
Well, I'm opposed to it.
You're opposed to it?
Yes.
And so you would just stand up and say, I can't be with you on that?
Yes, of course. No two people agree on everything, Bob. If a person wants someone who agrees with them on everything, why, of course, you'd have to run yourself, because there are so many issues. But I want to emphasize that we are in complete agreement on the vast majority of issues and on the significant issues, on the need to change economic policies. There are, of course, going to be times on which I and other individual members of Congress don't agree with a particular policy or provision, but I think it's going to be very, very rare.
Have you had any conversations with the governor as yet as to how you're going to approach the economic situation and how you'll go about that on the Hill?
No, I've spoken with Governor Clinton and Vice President Gore, and our staffs have been talking several times daily on how we're going to proceed, first in getting together and then developing a process for consultation and working together. I expect it to be a very positive, a very good and productive working relationship.
What features would you think that economic package would take? Obviously, there are going to be higher taxes on the wealthy. That's going to be a part of it. After that, what? Capital gains, perhaps?
Well, Governor Clinton has said repeatedly that he favors a targeted capital gains tax cut, as I do. Remember now, we passed that as part of the economic growth package in March. President Bush vetoed that. We passed it again in October. President Bush vetoed that. I think many of the elements there, an investment tax allowance on a temporary basis, or in the alternative, some form of accelerated depreciation to encourage business investment in new plant and equipment, I think makes a great deal of sense. Other measures to spur home construction and home buying, I think make a great deal of sense. One of the economic problems we have in New England severely and around the country in varying degrees is a depression in real estate. I think we want to take steps to deal with that. I think there are a variety of measures that Governor Clinton has under consideration that I hope we can enact promptly and that he will sign into law to get the economy moving.
What about the President-elect's idea of using his executive powers to lift a lot of the restrictions having to do with abortion? Good idea?
Very good idea. The fact of the matter is that the restrictions were imposed by President Bush contrary to the views of an overwhelming majority of Americans, contrary to the views of most members of Congress, and in some cases, I believe, contrary to the intent of the law. So I think it will be right and appropriate that Governor Clinton undo by executive order that which President Bush wrongly did by executive order.
How about lifting the ban on homosexuals in the military? Good idea?
Yes.
You would favor?
Yes.
You would favor that. Will you be able to organize the Senate in such a way that you can get these confirmations of the Senate, of the cabinet officers done, do you think, by Inauguration Day?
After President Bush's election in 1988, I extended to President Bush the offer to process his nominees prior to his inauguration so that they could be ready to go immediately following the inaugural, and we did that in most cases. I will, of course, extend the same offer, the same courtesy to President Clinton, and I hope that he takes us up on it. I have already alerted the chairman of the committees in the Senate with jurisdiction over prospective nominees to be ready to hold hearings in the period between the convening of the Congress on January 5th and the inauguration of the new president on January 20th. We will be very cooperative in that regard.
Some have mentioned you as a possible member of the cabinet. If offered a cabinet post, would you take it?
I don't think so, because I don't think there's a cabinet post in which I feel I could be more effective and do more than the position I now hold. But obviously, out of courtesy to the new president, I will meet with him and talk with him about anything. But my own feeling is that I can best serve by remaining in my current position and trying to get the new administration's legislative agenda enacted promptly, effectively, and I hope in a bipartisan way.
Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, thanks for being with us. That's it for this week. We'll see you next week with more on the coming changes in Washington here on Face the Nation.
The Crow and the Pitcher. How can you increase investment returns? Merrill Lynch has a mutual fund strategy that may help. Pick one of our funds you think holds promise. Then systematically invest the same amount time after time. More shares are added when the price is down, fewer when the price goes up. The moral is, a consistent approach may raise the level of your reward.
The fields of America. Each year, Archer Daniels Midland takes the harvest from 30 million acres. That's equal to a strip of land 15 miles wide, stretching from one coast to the other. From this grain, ADM makes food ingredients that not only help fill our own nutritional needs, but help provide nutrition for the rest of the world as well. ADM, supermarket to the world.
This portion of Face the Nation was sponsored by Merrill Lynch, a tradition of trust, and by the Archer Daniels Midland Company, ADM, supermarket to the world. Face the Nation originated in Washington, D.C.
CBS News.
Those great American malls, lots of stores and lots of crime. Surprised? The story the malls never wanted you to see. Eye on America tomorrow on the CBS Evening News.